Welcome into episode 373 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Peru and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, the Bruins are 2-0 under Joe Sacco. Not the prettiest of wins necessarily, but clearly the defense is shoring up a little bit. Offense is still a little bit dry, but just initial impressions through two games. And I guess we can go right into the opening shift. So, Bridget, why don't we throw it to you?
Yeah, so I mean, my opening shift is that they found a way to win since Jim Montgomery got fired. Now, though he wasn't out of a job long, which we will get to. They win the first two games under Joe Sacco. But like you mentioned, they did not have a lot of offensive output. They had a goal in the first game, two goals in the second game. They win 2-1 over Detroit. But at the very least, I feel like the effort has gone up, and we've seen energy and maybe confidence to go up. But there are still certain players that are still plenty of players that are not where they have been in the past. So we'll get into that in Brian's shift. But basically, my opening shift is when we talked last, we looked ahead to the schedule and like what games should they be able to take in this 5-game stretch. And Utah had been struggling. They were able to win against Utah, albeit it was a 1-0 game. They beat Detroit, and now ahead of them they have Vancouver at home on Tuesday, and then they have the Islanders on the road the next day, and then the Penguins back at home on Friday. So there are still winnable games coming up. Could they start the stretch with Sacco on a longer win streak? Like could this end up being a 5-game win streak for them? They haven't strung together wins pretty much at all this season. So their offense for sure is going to have to start getting going, because you're not going to win every game if you only can score 1 or 2 goals. A lot of times your goaltending and your defense aren't going to be good enough to stop that. But luckily for the Bruins, their defensive play the last 2 games under Sacco has been better.
Yeah, their defensive play has been better. Their special teams has been better, which is important. But unfortunately for the Bruins, and I'm glad to see that their defense is getting better and that they've gotten 2 wins here. But if we're gonna take off the Joe Sacco, new head coach bump blinders, that I think Bruins fans and ourselves included, like we want the team to bounce back. We want them to get back to what they should be. But if their offense doesn't improve, then it's not going to happen. And I'm starting to wonder, I've been wondering, I think we all have been, do they have the personnel for the offense to be better? Now, over the last 17 games, Bridget and Scott, the Bruins are averaging 1.82 goals per game. That's quite the sample size, 17 games. That dates back to October 19th, their first meeting against Utah. And then even at the top of the leading scorers, David Pastrnak right now, he's on pace for a 30-goal season. 30 goals, 41 assists, 71-point season. That's a 40-point drop-off from his last couple of years, give or take. Now, that's your leading scorer, right? So it's tough to really come down hard on your leading scorer when he is just that, your leading scorer. But for his standards, he's very much off pace for what he's capable of. But you go further down the lineup, and Elias Lindholm, by most accounts, none of us have been saying has had a great offensive year. He's third on the team in scoring with 10 points. Justin Brazeau, who should be a middle 6 guy, third line guy, he's fourth on the team in scoring with 9 points. I said this to you guys before we started recording, but Charlie Coyle and Nikita Zadorov each have 22 games played, and they each have 5 points on the year. Pavel Zacha, 7 points. So I don't know. Joe Sacco made comments that it starts with defense and then the offense will come. I guess let's see how that plays out. But I'm glad they've gotten the 2 wins. Bridget, hopefully they can pull a win streak together here. But the offense has to wake up, and it has to wake up fast.
Yeah, lot to get into there. My opening shift is about the other big news from the weekend that Bridget touched on, which is that Jim Montgomery already has another job. The St. Louis Blues announced on Sunday morning that they had fired Drew Bannister and signed Montgomery to a 5-year contract to take over as their head coach. It is the shortest turnaround from firing to new job in season in NHL history. Only 5 days later, he was hired after being fired. So, good for him. And this was the one that always made the most sense. I think I even mentioned it our last podcast. Like, he broke into the NHL in St. Louis. He met his wife there. They still have a home there. They still spend the off seasons there. He was an assistant coach there for 2 seasons, 2020 to 22, and before he got hired by the Bruins. And he drew rave reviews. Doug Armstrong, their GM, loved him. They're young players, now in their prime players, like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, had a ton of good things to say about him. And now, like, in retrospect, if you look at last spring, the Blues season ended April 17th, and Drew Bannister had been an interim head coach through the rest of that season. They didn't sign him to an extension and make him the full-time head coach until May 7th, which was 3 days after the Bruins knocked off Toronto in the first round. And it seems pretty clear in retrospect that they were waiting to see if Montgomery was going to get fired then. I think he was the guy they wanted all along. They knew once the Bruins advanced, he wasn't going to get fired. So then they went to Bannister. But Doug Armstrong said it on Sunday in his press conference. He said this move was not about Drew Bannister. It was about Jim Montgomery. He wanted Montgomery. Montgomery became available. He went and got him. So, now you have something to track. Obviously, what Bruce Cassidy did in Vegas was a huge story, winning the Cup his first year. I don't think Montgomery's going to do that because I don't think that Blues team is good enough to be anywhere near that. But it is going to be interesting to see how Montgomery now does in his next job, which, begins right away.
And if we want to talk about how things kind of went down between Montgomery and the Bruins, Elliot Friedman on the most recent 32 Thoughts podcast talked about how Boston offered Montgomery a 3-year contract, not a 5, but that ultimately it came down to a difference in approach, which seems to me to be like on ice approach, not anything contractual. So that kind of leads us into, kind of a blend of your opening shift, Scott, and mine, which is just like, is this team built to, Montgomery is an offensive mind. Clearly, the Bruins have been struggling offensively, but did Montgomery see something with this, the construction of this roster where it wasn't conducive for his style of coaching, which is puck possession, quality over quantity? I think all coaches want to play fast in the NHL these days, so I don't know if that's a unique aspiration for a coach these days, but it just clearly seems like, and if that's the case, like, how does that make you guys feel that the Bruins' own head coach maybe didn't believe in the roster construction? What does that say about the team and the disconnect between front office and coaching staff?
Well, I don't know if it says anything really about the approach from management or what the roster looks like. I think it's exactly what you said. I think it's just a difference in approach and style. Like Montgomery, we've talked about it plenty, like quality over quantity in terms of shots. He doesn't care about just throwing pucks on net. He wants to work for, real high quality, high danger chances. In his first season here, obviously he had a team that was very much capable of doing that. The 22-23 team had a lot of offensive talent, made plays off the rush, generated high danger chances that way, cross slot passes, all of that. Some east-west flair in their game. And now in the 2 seasons since, Don Sweeney has adapted and tried to build a team that is designed to play more north-south, forecheck, funnel pucks to the net, get big bodies there, and try to score that way. It's a different style. This is a very different team than 22-23. And I think Montgomery would, when he would talk about how they want to play, he would say all of that, and it would sound like he was on the same page with Sweeney, or that he at least recognized, how he had to coach them. But now, when you start to hear some of the stuff like this, when you hear, maybe Montgomery wasn't completely sold on being around long term, and you get that Friedman report, like, maybe he was saying it but didn't truly believe it or feel it, or was kind of, maybe there's part of him sitting there saying like, yeah, I guess this is how we have to play, but man, it's not really how I want to play.
Yeah, and very obviously there was a disconnect because the team just hasn't clicked. And you want to know what? I don't think that they've been even that when Monty was here. I don't think they were even getting those high quantity shots. Like they weren't doing either really.
Quality.
No, they weren't doing high quantity either. I'm saying like they weren't.
Right, 'cause, I mean, he didn't really want to do that.
So like they weren't going for either because the quality stuff they couldn't create, and they weren't prioritizing the quantity, and they weren't taking a lot of point shots that were getting through and creating stuff that way. So, and also obviously personnel very different from 2 years ago when they had Bergeron who could facilitate, down low passing really well through the bumper and through the slot, and Krejci, obviously, Hall, like this was a different team that did have the ability to move pucks and go east-west and give you higher quality stuff. But like you said, Brian, roster may just not be built like that anymore. Because Charlie Coyle has struggled doing stuff like that. Pavel Zacha at times has. Sometimes he's great with Pasta, but sometimes they've not been able to produce much this season. So, yeah, and I don't know about like Trent Frederick. Trent Frederick's more of like a straight line, go to the net, fight for pucks kind of guy than let's pass it around and see if we can find our like high danger chance this way. But anyway, guys, I think it's still clear that the disconnect was there between Montgomery and maybe Sweeney and the team not being able to take both visions and make something productive out of it. But when we talked about who's to blame for coach getting fired, everybody kind of said, well, it wasn't really his fault first and foremost. Like, he's a good coach. And obviously, when you're only unemployed for 5 days, there's plenty of other people out there that probably thought, wow, the Bruins made the wrong choice. We would like to add this guy to our organization. And so he goes right back to St. Louis, and he gets picked up right away. So I don't think any of us are surprised by that. I think we all knew that, as with Bruce Cassidy, this is a good coach that's not going to go very long without a job.
Yeah, and as it pertains to, a coach and the roster he's given, styles make fights. And as Scott pointed out, he had a much different roster 2 years ago with Boston. Last year, but, I thought last year he had a better coaching job than his first year, despite the fact that his first year as Bruins coach, they broke regular season records, but he had the roster that kind of made sense. Last year, they really overachieved. And when you overachieve, that's indicative of great coaching, in my opinion, in addition to, players outperforming their norms in some circumstances. But that's why this year kind of caught us off guard, because, if he had a great roster in 22-23 and that explains his success, okay. But, he didn't have that same roster in 23-24, and they overachieved. And so I'm surprised that now the roster, which isn't much different than last year, all of a sudden was a mystery for him to, I don't know, something's not adding up. But at the end of the day, the fit just wasn't there anymore. And one thing that's significantly improved in the very brief 2-game sample has been Boston's special teams. So, I talked about off the top how if their offense can't get it going, then they're going to have a tough time winning hockey games. That's true. But at the same time, it's a special teams league, and their special teams has improved. Over the last 2 games, their penalty kill is 8 for 8, and that includes the game against Detroit. And Detroit, I believe, has one of the top power plays in the league. Forgive me for not knowing their exact ranking, but it's up there. And on the power play, Boston has gone.
I know they were 5th going into the game. I don't know where they are coming out,
but a formidable power play unit, and they go 0 for 4 against Boston. Utah has some skill, and Boston goes 4 for 4 against them on the PK too. Power play, Boston's 2 for 9 in their last 2 games, a power play goal in each of the last 2 games. I think that's like 22%. So, and when I think Boston was scoring at like 15% on the year. So again, it's a very small sample, but the special teams was struggling with Jim Montgomery as the head coach, despite his assistants having much to do with those as well. But under Joe Sacco's jurisdiction, in 2 games, the special teams has improved. So that's something to continue to watch as well.
Yeah, as far as the, last year overachieving, like one thing I would point out here is the structure. The structure was already starting to not totally fall apart, but it was
Bending.
not nearly as good as it was the year before. Like I know we covered it at the time, but they gave up a lot of high danger chances last year, and they didn't create a lot. Now, what's changed is last year they still had elite goaltending, and they finished at a high rate. So I just pulled it up just to compare. So last year they finished the season 3rd in the NHL in team save percentage, and 8th in team shooting percentage. Those are good spots to be. You're finishing a lot of chances and you're stopping a lot of chances.
Mm-hmm.
This year, so far, they are 22nd in team save percentage and 29th in team shooting percentage. So, like, that's a little oversimplifying. I don't want to make this all just about percentages and numbers, but like those are huge changes. Your goaltending has been much worse than last year, and your finishing has been way worse than last year. So, like the structure and like the chances that they're giving up and getting aren't like a whole lot different. Like that they were already starting to struggle both to create high danger chances and to prevent them last year. In fact, they've actually been better this year at preventing high danger chances, at least at 5-on-5. So, like if those 2 things were different, if they were finishing more, if they even had a league average shooting percentage and a league average save percentage, like we'd probably be talking about like maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 more wins. Like it would be a noticeable difference. And I think we'd all feel a little better about this team, but they haven't gotten that. Their finishing has been awful, and their goaltending until these last 2 games has been pretty bad.
Well, Scott, let's oversimplify it a step further. Dating back to January 1st of this year, so almost a full calendar year at this point, Boston's a 500 hockey team in the regular season. So that includes the second half of last year where they had those favorable numbers that you're speaking of, high conversion rates and extraordinary goaltending and high danger chances. So even when those stats were in their favor, they were a 500 team, right? So I mean, I guess that is true. Like the sample size under Montgomery goes further than just this season. They've been a 500 hockey team for their last, I don't know what, 40, 50 games regular season. So
I still think like the perplexing part is that no matter, it doesn't really matter if you're talking about like the first season, second season under Monty to now, like Pastrnak has looked completely different this year. Like I don't. That's one thing that I don't understand exactly. What maybe it has to do with bad systems on the power play and then confidence down and that injury that people were talking about, but might just be blown out of proportion. Like because he's probably fine now, and it seems like maybe it's more of a mental thing now. But getting Pastrnak going is the key to the offense, and obviously you need to get all this other stuff going too, but when he's not carrying you, like he also carried them at some points in the previous 2 seasons, and just like goaltending. So when you don't have anybody there to lean on and everybody's kind of looking at each other like, okay, well, we all got to do better. It's definitely not easy to try to solve everything all at once, which is kind of what Sacco's been tasked to do. And to his credit, or to the team's credit, they're executing better on special teams, like you said. Korpisalo came in, got a shutout. Swayman came in, only gave up 1 goal. So maybe things are trending in the right direction, both of those categories. But I saw you tweet, Brian, just a quick little video clip of Pastrnak trying to play the puck in front of the net. Like he takes it in front of the net, and then he kind of loses it behind him, and he can't seem to get a shot off. And it's like, there's just moments like that where I'm going, I just don't know what the fix, because that feels like it's a player fix. Like that feels like Pasta has to somehow find a way out of whatever he's going through right now.
Yeah, no, it wasn't just once, it was twice. I mean, there's good on both plays. Both plays, he forces a turnover down low, and he gives himself a one on 0 on the goalie, mano a mano, and not once did he get a shot off. And it's just like he's 100% over. It's there could be some sort of physical ailment that the players are dealing with. I don't know. I mean, every player deals with something over the course of the season, but in those situations in particular, that's 1,000% mental. He's overthinking everything. That's just, you're talking about a 60+ goal scorer in the NHL, and one of the best goal scorers in the world when he's going. And when you're one of the best goal scorers in the world, and it's you and the goalie, nothing but time, and on 2 occasions you don't get a shot off. I mean, it doesn't get more mental than that. He's overthinking everything. He's overthinking all of his instincts. And what's the solution to that? Obviously it's time. It's reps. It's, more importantly, finding the back of the net and getting confidence. When you have confidence, those second guesses don't really happen. So he's fighting it in a major way. But to your point, Bridget, he absolutely is the engine that fuels this offense. And he led the team in scoring by like 40 points last year. So it's we can talk about, and I can talk about how Coyle's struggling and Zaka's struggling and this guy and that guy, and it's all valid, it's all true. But, if David Pastrnak is not being David Pastrnak, then a 70-point Pasternak's not going to get this team to where they want to go. Unfortunately, that's the burden he has to have as the best player. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Right. Last year, he's a top 5, last 2 years, like he's a top 5 scorer in the league. And that makes a huge difference. That raises your entire team's offensive floor. Like, yes, you need other guys to get going around him. But when you have that kind of elite scorer, he's going to do enough scoring on his own that like your offense is going to just have a certain baseline that it's at just about every night, because he's averaging over a point per game. So like there's a goal and a half every night that he's involved in either creating or scoring himself. You drop down to that 70-point pace. I mean, right now he's tied for 44th in the NHL in points. Like that's, if that's your top scorer, like that's, and you don't have a bunch of other guys like that, which they don't, you're going to be struggling offensively. So, Brian, you nailed it all. I think it is mental as much as anything right now. Passing out of those chances it's all mental to me. Like we've seen him bury so many of those over the years that it looks like a guy who just doesn't have confidence, who just isn't trusting his instincts right now. It's second guessing. And like, then you see the frustration when he gets back to the bench, right? Because after those chances, Nesson cuts him on the bench, and like you're seeing him like shaking his head, hanging his head, just kind of like looking upwards. And it's like, it's the body language of someone who is like, man, I can't do anything right now. Like everything I try to do just goes, it's the wrong decision. And the reality is he probably just needs to see a couple go in and then the floodgates open. I think it was Brick who mentioned during Saturday's broadcast, he was saying like, I know it was just an empty netter, but you kind of wish that empty net goal on Thursday stood just so Pastrnak could see one go in and like know he has a 1 for that game. And it's, it's funny, like talking about how much he's struggling and passing out of shots, and it's like he has still set up he's been involved in the setup on the winning goal in each of the last 2 games. He's picked up an assist on both of those. And by the way, he still leads the NHL in shots on goal. So it's like he is getting chances. We just know there's even more chances for him that are there that he's not taking advantage of. I'd be a lot more worried if he wasn't even getting the shots or the looks. He is. I think he just needs that confidence to finish them, which probably isn't going to come until 3 go in a 2-game stretch, and now he's rolling again.
Yeah, that the empty net goal that got called back, that did feel like a bigger negative than really it was in terms of like winning the game. Though it was still only a 1-goal game at that point, but like he knocked it out of the air with a high stick, so they called it back. But either way, we know he can do so much more. So that's the thing, that it's like what we're watching is different than what we've been watching with him for the last however many years. It's been a long time. Like he's been good pretty much from when he came into the league to I don't know what his lowest point season is. How many years it's been since he's been on this pace, but it feels like it's been a long time, and maybe even his first season or so. But yeah, to get him going, the power play has to get going. His line mates have to get going too. It's not just on him. And then you look behind him and behind that line, and you're like, okay, well, there's plenty of other guys on this team that haven't been scoring either. I did think it's funny that Justin Brazeau has the 3rd most goals on the team with 5 now, and that's not somebody that you can like push to be your 3rd leading. Like if he's the 3rd leading goal scorer at the end of the year, good for him. But I think that probably also says something about Coyle and Zaka and other guy Lindholm, like other guys that should be ahead of him, but maybe aren't.
Yeah, and just to go back to the past Pastrnak stuff for a second, because it's interesting, guys, because the season started, his first 3 games of the year, he recorded a goal. Now, even then, like the first goal on opening night in Florida was like off someone's knee from the corner, and the game was already out of hand. He scored the overtime winner against the Kings, and from what I remember, he was kind of quiet up until that goal. Then scored against Montreal. So either way you slice it, he had 3 goals to start the year. So he has 5 goals in his last 19 games, whatever it's been. But Scott, you mentioned like it'd be nice to see him get that empty net goal against Utah to kind of see something go in. And that's true, but I got to be honest, that's what I was hoping for in that first St. Louis game, where he gets that big goal in the final minute and a half to give Boston the lead and eventually the win. And that was a monkey off the back moment. You saw his celebration in that game, and then he follows it up in Dallas with a no-show. So even when he's had those moments of like, oh, finally, he's not following it up. And to me, that's also concerning. I mean, yes, he's probably going to need one of those 2-goal nights, or a night where he gets a hat trick and then he's going. Because just scoring 1 goal just doesn't seem to be doing it for him when he does get them. That's what disappointed me most in that Dallas game, was that in addition to the team not showing up after that feel-good win, Pastrnak was nowhere to be found either. So again, we can beat this horse to death. It starts with Pastrnak. It's everybody in a team. I mean, I feel like we've spent a lot of time on him, and where we should be talking about as well, Coyle and Zadorov having the same amount of points, and all these guys that are struggling as well. It's a bit unfair, but to be honing in on Pastrnak. But the unfortunate reality is that when you have the talent and the skill that he does, and the pedigree that he does, your standard is just higher, and the pressure is greater on you. And yeah, it probably sucks, because at the end of the day, everybody's human, but it's just the way that it is. And his standards are higher, so he has to be better, but everybody has to be better.
If Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews was like 44th, like you said, Scott, I feel like the sky would fall in Canada. Like, the Oilers. I don't think they would know what to say either if their best player all of a sudden went from top of the league to 40 whatever, which would just be crazy. But my opening shift was, could the Bruins string together?
But by the way, the sky was falling because McDavid was off to a very slow start this season. He's picked it up, and now I think he's at 28 points in 19 games. But I think to start, he was like 8 points in 10 games or something, and like only 1 or 2 goals. So he got going. Pastrnak
he's gotten there. We're still waiting to see that in Boston. But my opening shift was, can the Bruins string together their longest win streak of the season? Because guess how long their longest win streak is currently?
2 games.
2 games. They've done it twice. And not in pretty fashion.
Now 3 times, right?
Yeah, well, 2 times previously. This I'm saying, like, I wasn't counting it because maybe it gets to be a longer win streak. So
it was Kings, Canadians, Seattle Flyers, and then this recent one, right? Utah and Detroit. Okay.
Yes. Could this be extended to the longest this season, which would be 3 or maybe even 4?
Let's not get crazy.
Let's not get crazy, guys. But their next game is it's a winnable game. So like they're playing Vancouver, and then I think you mentioned this before. Like they get stuck with some back-to-backs here, so that ends up being a back-to-back with the Islanders. But I feel like they really need this win to. How many times in the first season Monty was with the Bruins? Like that win streak they were on was like an 8-game win streak. I don't know. They did it all the time. They were on win streaks all the time. A loss was like a anomaly, and it was like we'll get them next time, and everybody believed it. This time it's like you just need to see a trend, not we go forward and then we go back. Like there needs to be some sort of trend. So we're talking about, maybe special teams is trending in the right direction. Maybe goaltending is trending in the right direction. Well, it needs to not see a step back in the next 2 games, because then we're sitting here talking about, it's more of the same, like we want to be able to analyze something that's changing and going a different direction rather than the same thing we've kind of been going back and forth on the whole season, like 1 step forward, 2 steps back or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Vancouver's a good team. They're maybe not off to quite the start that they would like. And you're catching them with one very important player out, which is JT Miller, who took a leave of absence from the team. So obviously you just hope everything's okay with him. But he's they're after Quinn Hughes, arguably their best player. So that's a huge loss. So you're getting them a little shorthanded. Obviously, yeah, and you're going to get all the guys facing their former teams. You get the returns of Jake DeBrusk and Danton Heinen. As an aside, I am very interested to see what kind of reception DeBrusk gets, and is there a tribute video? Like Linus Ullmark got one and got a great ovation. I'm curious to see if that same thing happens with DeBrusk, because obviously the fans were much more divided on him over a long period of time. But there are also a lot of highlights there from his time in Boston. And then you get Zadorov and Lindholm facing the team that they were on to finish out last season. No Derek Forbort, he's injured. But yeah, this is the toughest game during this stretch. We highlighted like 2 weeks where pretty much every game is against a non-playoff team or a 500 or less team. This is the one that's not. This is the one that's against a team that is in the playoffs or at least right on the bubble in the West, and is over 500. So, yeah, it should be a good test. I think for the Bruins, it's like, yeah, you have to keep building on the things you've done these first 2 games under Sacco, which, as we've kind of outlined, like there's been a better effort. There's been a way better defensive structure. Goalies have been good when called upon, both Korpisalo and Swayman. And then, yes, the next step absolutely is adding more offense. But, you've shored up your special teams, penalty kill, suddenly 14 for the last 14. Like that's That's a lot better. That looks a lot more like a Bruins penalty kill. Power play has scored in back-to-back games. Like, if they can score again, if you can get a goal a game from your power play, that's going to be huge. And that will also help Pastrnak get going. So, yeah, that's the next step, because I think you are going to have to score more. I think you can be good. You can have a good defensive game, and Vancouver might still score 2 or 3 goals, because even without Miller, there is offensive talent over there, whether it's DeBrusk, Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson. Obviously, what Quinn Hughes does from the back end, he's their leading scorer again. He's just, he's so much fun to watch. He's so electric. And he's one of, like Cale Makar, he's one of those guys that you have to defend his offense from the back. Like, you have to be on him and aware of where he is at all times.
Yeah, well, Jake DeBrusk's 13 points and Danton Heinen's 10 points would be good enough for third and fourth in the Bruins in scoring at this point in the season. So you combine that with, Pettersson and Besser and Hughes. Connor Garland's always, a decent little player. So, yeah, I mean, I would say their offensive depth right now is more potent than Boston's. But, you guys are talking about the special teams improving and hopefully the power play starts clicking. I will say, again, because the Brewers are on a 2-game winning streak, and while the offense has not been plentiful, like, they're one positive thing was that they finally scored a 5-on-5 goal, and it was Brad Marchand's game-winning goal in Detroit. Scott, how long had they gone without a 5-on-5 goal? Was it 10 periods?
Yeah, they were in their 10th period without one. They'd gone 2 full games and 2 periods of the St. Louis game without one.
Yeah, I mean, a power play goal is nice, but you got to score even strength. And again, like, so is it personnel? Is it a personnel issue? Is it a confidence issue? Is it just a perfect storm of reasons why the Bruins haven't been scoring 5-on-5 to this point in the season? But under a new coach, maybe things start to change. We'll have to find out. But on the one hand, it's like, okay, that's encouraging. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, great. I'm glad they finally scored a 5-on-5 goal after 3 games. So, but again, in the spirit of not looking backwards and looking forward, like, that is something that if you're the Bruins, you can try to build off anything and anything to find confidence at this point.
And that's my point, is like, do they keep building? Do they keep trending, like taking steps forward? Because that's really what's been inconsistent this season, has been like, okay, your energy is good one day, or even from period to period. And then next game, it looks completely different. Like, remember the Philadelphia game? And I know the Flyers aren't that good, but that game looked good. And then you're like, okay, there's a win. And then that became the second time they won 2 in a row. And you're like, okay, after that, maybe this is the streak that's going to, get them going, and honestly save Monty's job. And then it went back. And then we kept having the same conversation. And then Monty did end up getting fired and now rehired. But it just something needs to change this time. And this needs to not be a loss, because then we're back to square one. And right now the Bruins are in the very last wild card spot. Obviously, we still have a lot of time, but you want to position yourself to start to break away from the pack, or because there's plenty of, and Scott said this a few weeks ago, like, there's a lot of mediocre teams. That's why the Bruins are hanging around. But at some point, someone's going to catch a win streak, and someone's going to be the team to try to gain some ground and show that they're not just mediocre or, on the bubble. And is this team actually going to be able to put together what we all thought they would be able to on paper, but haven't actually been able to do? And come more towards what the expectations were, and therefore become, like, solidify themselves as a playoff team? Or is the whole season going to be, okay, they're right on the bubble, they're right on the wild card, they might not make it, they might make it. Like, are they going to at some point make people feel comfortable that they're going to be a playoff team?
Yeah, I would say this game against the Canucks at least needs to be not a bad game. Like, if they lose a 3-2 hard-fought game where they play pretty well, like, I'm not going to freak out. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, the sky's falling, it's back to square one. Like, no, like, if that's your only hiccup here during the stretch, like, if you do that and then you bounce back and you beat the Islanders the next night, like, I think that's okay. Again, like, I'm not expecting the Bruins to, like, completely turn things around right away and start to look amazing and go on this great run. Like, I'm looking for, like, baby steps. Like, just get a little better. Like, establish a foundation that you can build off. Don't take these massive steps back where you lose 5-1 to a bad team or 8-2 to a good team. Like, don't do that anymore. At least be competitive in every game, good or bad team. Give yourself a chance to win and, like, start building good habits that you repeat game to game. So again, they've done that for 2 games so far under Joe Sacco. Again, not light the world on fire, not blow anyone out of the water, but establish a foundation defensively, structure-wise, and give yourself something to build off. Yes, eventually, at some point here soon, you have to start building and going up and getting better and better and scoring more. But, like, that's more what I'm looking for, is just, can you play good hockey, right? Like, can just go play a good game against the Canucks. And if you win or lose, like, that's almost secondary to me. Like, obviously you need to get points, but I think the Canucks are a good team. I don't think a 3-2 loss would be the end of the world, but a 6-1 loss, yeah, we'd be worried. That would be what they had been doing under Montgomery. That would be that just massive step back where you're like, well, so much for those baby steps from the previous 2 games.
Yeah, well, it's let's see what they are. Are they who they've been for the first quarter of the season, which would be a team that we haven't seen, or are they, again, closer to what we're accustomed to seeing? Because look, the other side of this argument is going to be, until more of the season plays out and they continue to struggle potentially, they have been bad. Like, they have not been a good hockey team, really, throughout this entire season. They've had a couple stretches where they're okay in this statistic or that statistic, but they have not been good. We've talked about their offensive production, top to bottom, has been, pretty much anemic. Yet they are still in a wild card position. They're above 500. If you want to account for just the win-loss column, they're below 500. But with the extra point, they're technically above 500. Win percentage-wise, Tampa would be ahead of them for the second wild card position. But if we're going off winning percentage, they are 1 spot outside the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, and that is with all of the struggles that we've talked about so far all year and at times on this podcast. That's with Charlie Coyle having 5 points, tied with Nikita Zadorov. That's with David Pastrnak on a 70-point pace. That's with Zacha with 7 points. That's with, like, Lindholm, 10 points, and most people can't even recall where they came from except for his goal against Utah. Like,
and Swayman's numbers being worse.
Swayman's numbers being where they are, a coaching change, like having the worst special teams in the league, just about having some of the worst plus minus in the league, like all of these things going against them, and they're still hovering at 500 and in the playoffs. Now, if it turns out that the team that we've seen for the first quarter is who they are, then yeah, they'll miss the playoffs, and they were who they we thought they were in the beginning of the season. But if they turn things around, like, I mean, it's, you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's let's see who they are. Let's see who they are.
Yeah, how about the Buffalo Sabres on a 7-3 run, their last 10, and suddenly in the playoffs? I don't think they're going to stick around, right? Like, it seems like every year there's a stretch where you're like, ooh, is this the Sabres year? And then they fall off. But like, they're one of the teams that you're competing with if you're the Bruins.
Mm-hmm.
Right now. So are the Islanders. So are the Islanders who you face on Wednesday. So that'll be a pretty important one too.
Yeah.
All right, Bridget and Scott, I think we're probably close to wrapping it up. So right now, obviously, it's Monday, and there's quite the famous holiday on Thursday. So let's maybe figure out in real time when the next time we'll record is.
Yeah, I think maybe Wednesday between, even though it's a back-to-back, but maybe we can go a little bigger picture and kind of, obviously everyone always looks at that Thanksgiving mark on the calendar and where you are at that point. So we can react to the Vancouver game, and then maybe we take a little bigger picture look. There's still a couple questions we've gotten over the last week or so that I think we can answer, and people can definitely send in more. Maybe we'll do, if we get enough, maybe even like a little mini mailbag. So either tweet us at the skatepod, email skatepod@weei.com, or just comment on the YouTube video. We can get to some of that too. So yeah, I think that's, we're not going to be recording on Thanksgiving, and then that Friday is tough as well. So
yeah, I have
Okay.
games Friday and Saturday, so but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we have Bruins Canucks on Tuesday, and then Wednesday it's the Bruins versus the Islanders, right? Is that what it is? And then you have Pittsburgh on Black Friday, 6:30 on TNT. So yeah, so some winnable games here. Like we said last episode, they go on to play, I think, Detroit again, Philly, Chicago. Like there's some winnable games in these next couple of weeks for the Bruins. So again, partly why I'm so curious to see if the offense can get it going, because if you can't get it going against these teams, then oh boy. So now's the time for this Bruins team. They really got to take advantage of the coaching change, the schedule, everything. So
I have one last parting thought, just get you guys' thoughts quick, but just because it happened on Friday, but we haven't had a chance to react yet. But Bruins sent down Georgi Merkulov, called up Mark McLaughlin. So I guess just now that we got another little sample look at Merkulov, what did you guys think of this stretch of games from him?
I mean, he did some things well. They had him on the top power play unit for a little bit too. Like there's certain things that he adds that the Bruins have been lacking, like creativity and finishing ability. But because he gets there was at least one time I remember, Scott, that you said, if you want to stay, you have to finish that. Because he got a chance, low slot, didn't put it in. And it's okay, he's in the right spots. We know he knows how to finish. He's a goal scorer at the AHL level, and a good playmaker at the AHL level. But you need to finish when you get your call up, and that's what his problem was, and that's why he's not still in Boston. But if he had scored on that, I don't see why they would switch him out for Mark McLaughlin. So yeah, that's what they were hoping for. They were hoping for him to be a spark in the offense, and at times you notice them in the right places and doing good things, but they really needed that goal from him, and for his career, he would have stuck around longer.
So I wasn't unfortunately able to see the St. Louis game live, and I life just takes over. I wasn't able to go back and watch it in full either. So I just saw the highlights of that game, and that is when he had a nice assist to Frederick. But so I don't want to give too much of a review on him because I just wasn't able to see his entire stint up. But from what I saw, yeah, Bridget, you're right. He offers creativity, some pure skill that I think the rest of the forward group could use. Where I would say, I don't know if he's a long-term guy in the NHL. Does he win enough battles? Does he win enough, races to lose pucks? I think his size. If you're going to be undersized like that, watch Connor Garland tomorrow night when the Bruins play the Canucks. Right, an undersized guy, but doesn't stop moving his feet, isn't afraid to get his nose dirty, be an agitator to the people he plays against. That's the style you have to play in the NHL when you are that undersized. Georgi Merkulov is very undersized, and because of that, he doesn't have the longest of strides, so he can't cover ground. So he has to be, extra quick with his foot speed, and I don't think his foot speed is extra quick at the NHL level. I think he's a fine skater, but I don't think he has that separation speed at the NHL level, and I don't know if he wins enough puck battles. So all in all, it's I'm just I know a lot of fans are upset. Like, why are you sending him back down? Like, he looked good, and I'm not here to piss on their Cheerios or at all. I just think like I'm not
What
like
I was saying is that.
you ever heard pissing your Cheerios?
No, and I've never
Oh,
heard
it's
of
gross.
anyone else doing it either.
Scott, have you heard pissing your Cheerios?
Yeah.
I'm not pissing your Cheerios. Yeah, it's a phrase.
I've definitely
Yeah.
heard that expression.
Yeah. So look, I don't want to do that because I would just say I'm not like
We just lost our Cheerio sponsor. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we're still waiting for the Duncan's one too. So,
Oh God.
so I just Scott, to answer your question, I'm not saying I'm not glad they sent him down. I'm just like I don't think he like made it so much where it's like, oh my God, how is he not still here? Because I just don't know if he affects the game in a 5-on-5.
Well,
Right,
my
yeah,
thing was like I just every single time there's somebody gets sent down, I'm just waiting for them to bring back Matt Poitras. Like at some point, you see who comes up and you're like, well, isn't Matt Poitras a better option than that? Because they bring up, I understand they're trying to develop him, but like they're also not in a position of luxury where they can just be like, yeah, you go down. Like they are calling these people up that aren't as good as Matt Poitras, and he just continues to stay in Providence when they potentially could use him, could need him to help their offense.
Yeah, and we'll get into this some more on Wednesday because unsurprisingly, Matt Poitras is the person we've gotten the most questions about.
Always mailbag is always heavy Matt Poitras.
Yep, always. I guess I would say like in the specific instance, like what's the role? I mean, they brought Mark McLaughlin up to be the 13th forward. What good does it do Matt Poitras to be the 13th forward sitting in the press box?
But what good do they like? Why isn't someone else the 13th forward if Matt Poitras gets called up? Like you could call him.
I mean,
up,
they made Tyler
lineup.
Johnson the 13th forward, and then they felt like he was practicing well enough to get another chance to get in. He sets up a goal Saturday, so like
no, I like it.
I think you have to reward guys who are working their way back into the lineup too and responding to being healthy scratches. That Johnny Beecher got healthy scratched, came back, played pretty well at first. I don't know if he's keeping it up. We'll see. I already saw it as we're recording. One of the line tweets from practice. It looked like maybe McLaughlin is like interchanging with Beecher a little. So I guess we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess on Merkulov specifically, like my biggest takeaway from this stint is I want to see the Bruins figure out what they think he is because let's start at training camp. Bruins try Poitras at both. They try him on the wing in addition to having him at center. I asked Jim Montgomery, would you try the same thing with Georgi Merkulov and give him a look at wing? And Montgomery said, no, we see him as a center. He's never played wing. Then he goes down to Providence and he plays exclusively center. I'm not sure if he had a game on the wing in Providence this year. And then the Bruins call him up and play him exclusively on the wing. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, either you think he can play wing or you don't. Like, how do you go into the season saying, no, he's a center, and then, a month and a half in, you call him up and you play him on the wing when he hasn't played there all year? Like, that's a little weird to me. So, like, if you think he's going to be better at center, then play him at center. And if you think that he's ultimately a wing at the NHL level, if he sticks at all at the NHL level, then play him on the wing in Providence and like get him used to playing there. Because Brian, you're right. Like he lost some board battles. That was one of the things that stood out as the negative to me was like there were a couple plays up the boards that he didn't win or wasn't able to get pucks out or make a pass off the boards. And it's like, well, maybe if he actually did that more, he might get better at it. Like, give him a chance.
Yeah, well, I think
he get a lot of time on ice normally when his sample comes and goes. It's like his time on ice normally isn't a lot.
Well, I will say it was better he got 3 more minutes per game this time than
and that's probably because of power play time.
Yeah, that helps. I mean, yeah. Especially like he started a game in the first unit and then he was still getting second unit time. So yeah.
If I had to guess, Scott. Like I would say the Bruins are looking at probably some of the things I was mentioning, which is his lack of size and strength. You talk about board battles as a winger. Every play starts as a battle between centermen, and I'm not sure if they're sold on his strength at the NHL level to win draws, win those 50-50 draws where you have to get in with your body. And so if that's the case, right, it's like, okay, then to your point, Scott, then why are you hell bent on him being a center down in Providence? And like, what's the developmental path here? If you don't believe in his size and strength as a center at the NHL level, then why waste time in the minors? And to your point, so yes, figure out what you want from him, and maybe they're trying to give him maybe they're trying to show him off a little bit as I'm not saying NHL teams are like licking their lips to see Georgi Merkulov play as trade bait, but maybe there's an element of like just trying to see what he can do at all, giving an NHL chance. I really do think they don't trust him in dot with his lack of size and strength. I just don't. And honestly, I can't say I disagree with him there. Like, could you guys see him being very successful in the NHL faceoff dot? I don't know if I can.
Well, his numbers are not good right now. They haven't been good.
And like
but he also hasn't consistently played there.
Yeah, and even beyond the faceoffs, like I don't know if he can hold up to the 200-foot defensive game that it takes to be an NHL center, especially in the Bruins system. So, like, if I'm being honest, like if you told me, hey, Georgi Merkulov is going to be a full-time NHLer, maybe it's this season or next season, what position is he playing? My guess is actually it's probably going to be the wing. So I would my plan for him would be put him on the wing in Providence and see for a long stretch, not a couple games. And then he doesn't look great. We're going to move him back. Like give him 10, 15 games as a winger in Providence and really work with him on learning that, because I do think there's a decent chance that might be what he has to be if he is going to stick in the NHL.
You notice that we haven't gotten pretty much any mailbag questions or conversation that I just even hear naturally about the Bruins. It never mentions Fabian Lysell anymore. Like we used to get a lot of, hey, is this the right time to bring up Fabian? And
yeah, I still see a little bit of it on Twitter. But yeah, he's got to be more consistent in Providence. He dealt with an injury, then had a slow start. So
that's the story of his career. That encapsulates his entire career so far. He's had injuries, he's had slow starts, inconsistency. I mean, it's one of those things, guys, where when you have a Bruins team that's been this, I don't know, invisible offensively, for Lysell to not really even be thought of as a call up is it really tells you a lot about him.
Yeah, because we were talking about, who could help their offense? Their offense needs help. And it's like, you drafted this kid in the first round, natural goal scorer. Like, that's his whole bread and butter is scoring. Well, they definitely do not trust him at the NHL level.
And he has so much speed too, Bridget. Like, his speed is you watch the Bruins play this year, and oftentimes they're looking slow. Even if Lysell's not scoring, or converting on scoring chances, his speed is still it backs teams off. So the fact that he can't even
they don't trust his decision making,
right?
And I think there's also some sort of they don't trust his consistency and bringing the right energy or something something to that effect, because we've heard them talk about it when the only time we really get a chance to talk to management and coaching about him is during preseason. That's kind of the last time we've talked about him on here, I feel like, but they always say, he still needs to work on a lot of it's mental. I feel like they think that he just hasn't figured it out yet and needs to go work on it in Providence. And we were on his side for a little bit during the preseason. We saw flashes of what he could do, but I also saw him get nailed by Nikita Zadorov. I wasn't expecting it. And you can tell there's certain aspects of his game that in the NHL, just, he wouldn't get away with the same stuff he's gotten away with in the AHL and before that. So
yeah, I mean, he has two goals, 7 points in 14 games in Providence.
That's not it. That's
Not
not
going
it.
to get you a call up.
I mean, yeah, Bridget, you mentioned the mental aspect. Like I didn't like his mentality in training camp. Like again, I know I might be reading between the lines here and harping, but it's the little things. It's the body language between drills, like the going through the motions. It's like, buddy, you're trying to make an NHL roster here. Like you should be. So again, like it's my opinion on the player is it's a shame because he has a ton of skating ability and speed, but when you're not making smart plays with the puck in your stick and you're not doing what's being asked of you by your coaches, and you're not going to get that call up. So in any event, Bridget, Scott, thank you guys very much. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.